My name is Dr. Usman Chohan, and I'm advisor to the president of the Center for Aerospace and Security Studies, CAS, and I was one of the founding directors of this institution. My interest has always been in how the FATF has worked, particularly in terms of global financial regimes and the geopolitics impact that the FATF has had. So the Financial Action Task Force was created in 1989, and it was created as a movement in the war on drugs. So its first task was to combat narco-trafficking. This was at a time when you had things like Nicaragua, Iran-Contra, and all these things, and there was a huge panic, particularly among the conservatives in America, the Reaganites, that drugs are just out of control. And the thing is, the FATF was not very good at this because drug money and all these cartels were very, very large, and they continued to be large. What happened, though, is after 9/11, the FATF took on a new mandate on its own, which was to attack terror financing, countering the financing of terrorism. And it also took on this money laundering element to it, and it began to seek out entities that would be considered a tendency towards these sorts of nefarious activities. It then continued on to anti-nuclear proliferation activities, and then now it's got a fad of virtual currencies and cryptocurrencies. So the FATF has jumped from mandate to mandate, and you have to ask yourself, is this really the body that should be addressing all of these issues? Is this really a legitimate body, and is it an effective body? Now, if I look at all of these crises that the world faces, and this crisis that capitalism as a whole faces, I'm not particularly impressed with how the FATF has performed. Virtual currencies are out of control. And this is not from somebody who's anti-cryptocurrency. I do believe that there is a role for decentralized finance, but the fact that the FATF has taken up this charge and put up these rules, they are not effective. They're not realistic. And the FATF's guidelines are not particularly followed. On nuclear non-proliferation, you always come across these incidents and the FATF does nothing about them. For example, in India, you find uranium in briefcases, and I don't see what the FATF is doing about it. Similarly, terror financing continues to be a global crisis, and the FATF is not effective on this. And I think the worst example is money laundering, because if you look at money laundering in the world, it has grown from scale to scale, orders of magnitude, and the FATF is doing nothing at all about this, despite all of the official summitry and all of this hullabaloo that is created. Money laundering is a very, very big crisis, and the FATF's approach fundamentally is wrong, because the FATF likes to target developing countries. It likes to have a political game and an agenda behind it, rather than really caring about what money laundering is. If you really cared about money laundering, you would not be targeting third world countries, developing countries. You would be targeting these offshore jurisdictions and even onshore jurisdictions that become the ultimate destination for this. These are in the developed world, and they take in all of this wealth that comes from dubious means and stash it happily. That is money that cannot be invested in the developing world, even though it belonged to those people. So all of these juntas and dictators and all of these corporations, shell companies, all of these agents together make a parallel shadow architecture. And the FATF is not doing anything serious about those things. Instead, it picks on essentially random jurisdictions, or with a political agenda picking on countries, and it doesn't make sense. So you have to evaluate whether this body really is addressing what matters. Money laundering is now something that is beyond our conceivable proportions. There is literally our economy as we understand it globally, and then there's a larger shadow economy that exists, and the FATF is not the answer for that. And why isn't it good at this? Because the FATF is not a treaty body in the way that it has to be understood, which is to say it's not part of the United Nations. It's not part of something that international countries were original signatories to as part of the rules-based order. This was an ad hoc thing that was supposed to address narco-trafficking, and narco-trafficking is still a huge thing. So it isn't the sort of thing that you consider to be something that needs to be adhered to as part of an international system. You need something better than the FATF. You need something cleaner, more transparent, more responsible, and apolitical to get things done. The problems that the FATF aims to strike at are important ones, but they're not the guys who will get things done. So when I look at the injustices perpetuated by the dubious evaluations of the FATF, the mutual evaluations, I always see that they're really missing the point. And really missing the point about major international crises, I would compare them essentially to the magnitude of climate risk in terms of creating inequality in humanity and perpetuating injustices and penury and destitution. The FATF is really messing up. And that's because it misses the forest for the trees. So I argue for something better than the FATF, something serious, something big, something that everybody is signed up to, something that doesn't have the overwhelming power of a handful of countries which are complicit in money laundering and these issues. That is how you solve the world's crises. But if you start to have ad hoc bodies hopping around like the FATF, taking on all sorts of mandates and messing them all up, then you're not going to solve the world's problems. Thank you.